You so very much, and aloha mai kako, everyone. I'm so happy to be here to share this time with you. So thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Claudine Allen, and I'm the lead Native Hawaiian Program Specialist in the HUD Honolulu office. And today I will be sharing with you a presentation that gives a general but pretty wide overview about HUD's Native Hawaiian housing programs. All right, let's get started here. And I just wanted to turn my camera on very briefly to introduce myself. But to save on bandwidth, I'm going to turn off my camera, and hopefully it'll allow you to also focus on the PowerPoint presentation. Mahalo. So the HUD Native Hawaiian Housing Programs really consist of two programs: the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant and the Section 184A Native Hawaiian Housing Loan Guarantee Program. There's a statute called the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, and we refer to that as NHHBG. And so you will also hear me use the term NHHBG interchangeably with the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program, or NHHBG. So NHHBG is the name of the law that was created in 1996, which created a block grant housing assistance program for Native Americans and Alaska Natives on the mainland as well as in the state of Alaska. In 2000, that statute was amended to add to it Title VIII, Housing Assistance for Native Hawaiians. And that is the part of the statute that authorizes HUD to do the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program, which, as most of you know, provides housing assistance for Native Hawaiians who are eligible to reside on the Hawaiian homelands. Also in 2000, the statute called the Housing and Community Development Act of 1992 was amended, where the Section 184A Loan Guarantee Program was added. And this program allows HUD to guarantee mortgage loans for homeownership housing on the Hawaiian homelands. This slide here is designed to demonstrate how the appropriation process works for these, particularly for the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program to be funded. So the way that the federal budget process works is the President's administration will present their budget and to Congress, and then Congress, both sides of Congress, the House and the Senate, will work together to compromise and come up with a final federal budget for the federal fiscal year. So once that federal budget of appropriations are determined, then the appropriations that are approved for the various HUD programs are provided to HUD. So for the NHHBG programs, the funding is allotted to HUD. Then HUD awards the NHHBG grant funds to the recipients. So on the Indian side, which I call the Indian side of NHHBG, where funds are appropriated for what's called the Indian Housing Block Grant, those funds are divided and provided to tribes based on a formula that's designed for that program. Then on the Hawaiian side of NHHBG, those funds are allotted to be awarded to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, because under the statute of NHHBG, DHHL is identified as the sole recipient of the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant funds. In order for DHHL to receive these grant funds for the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program, DHHL must submit what's called a Native Hawaiian Housing Plan. DHHL will submit this plan to HUD, which identifies DHHL's goals and objectives and all of the different activities that it plans to use the NHHBG funds for the upcoming 12-month period. Once HUD determines that that housing plan is in compliance with NHHBG, then HUD will award the NHHBG funds to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Once that grant award is fully executed, then DHHL may go ahead and implement the activities using the NHHBG funds identified for the activities that are identified in the housing plan. DHHL could expend the funds directly for activities that it carries out themselves, or DHHL can make NHHBG funds available to subrecipients or contractors who would then be in partnership with DHHL to carry out activities identified in the housing plan.
Hello.
This graph is designed to demonstrate the funding history for the NHHBG program. DHHL received its first NHHBG award in fiscal year 2002 in the amount of $9.6 million. And so this shows you for each year the amount of grant awards that were awarded to DHHL. And so you can see that in the early years, the grant awards average anywhere from about almost $13 million to $8 million in that range. In 2016, there were no funds appropriated for the program, so there were no grant awards awarded in that year. And then for the following 5 years, $2 million were awarded each year. And you'll see in orange, there was actually a second appropriation of NHHBG funds in 2009 and 2021. So the blue graph lines represent what I call the regular NHHBG fund awards that was appropriated by Congress. But in 2009, there was a new and separate statute called the American Rescue and Recovery Act, which appropriated a separate award of NHHBG funds specifically under that legislation. So in 2009, DHHL actually received 2 separate awards of NHHBG funds, the regular NHHBG award, and then what we call the ARA, the American Rescue and Reinvestment Act awards. So in that year, DHHL received close to $10 million of regular NHHBG funds, and then an additional $10.2 million in NHHBG ARA funds. And then similarly, in 2021, DHHL received $2 million of regular NHHBG funds, and then an additional $5 million under the American Rescue Plan Act. And so following that, there was a big increase in appropriations for the NHHBG program of 22, pardon me,
Hey,
of
Claudia,
22. Yes.
this is Craig Watasi, Mark Development. I was just wondering, could you explain what happened in 2016 to 2021, why it was so low?
Sure. Give me a minute. Thanks, Craig. And then in 2022 and 2023, there was an appropriation of $22.3 and $21.3 million awarded to DHHL. We just received the federal budget for 2024. However, those funds have not been allotted and awarded yet. And so I have that bar shaded. It's not in a solid color, but it does represent $22.3 million that's included in the 2024 budget that was just approved by Congress and the president. And so to address the question of why nothing was appropriated in 2016 and the lower amount of funds appropriated in the following years is because at the end of 2015, there was a large balance of available funds accumulated in DHHL's account. And so Congress felt that DHHL had adequate funds available to it to carry out its activities. And so thus no funds were appropriated in 2016, and a lower amount of $2 million each in 2017 through 2021 was awarded. to give DHHL a chance to catch up and spend down the large accumulated balance that had been demonstrated in 2015. So since then, DHHL has successfully demonstrated that they have the ability to spend their funds a little quicker, and thus Congress is showing uh, their uh, uh, their appreciation of DHHL and the willingness that DHHL has to increase their expenditure of funds. So I hope that answers the question. Just to tie along with that discussion of the funding history, I wanted to just show that in summary, from the beginning through 2023, DHHL has received over $209 million of NHHSDA funds. And as of just yesterday, the available balance that DHHL has to it as far as NHHSDA funds go is $49.4 million. And over the years, as far as we can best calculate based on DHHL's performance reports, DHHL has been nearly 500 homes using their NHHSDA funds. They have used NHHSDA funds to help families, over 150 families acquire homes, and over 100 homes were rehabilitated using their NHHBG funds. NHHBG funds may also be used to provide housing services to families. And so since funds have been first awarded to DHHL, DHHL has provided over 4,000 individuals and families with NHHSDA-related housing services. The Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant, the purpose of it is to provide affordable housing opportunities to low-income Native Hawaiian families eligible to reside on Hawaiian homelands. And so I put a little asterisk here next to Native Hawaiian because what I want to do is explain that NHHSDA allows discrimination on the basis of race, but it does not prevent the provision of assistance under NHHSDA based on that. So NHHSDA is specifically designed to provide housing assistance to Native Hawaiian families. Now, despite the fact that it allows so-called discrimination on the basis of race, the program still is subject to other protected class as far as discrimination is concerned. And so discrimination is still prohibited on the basis of, aside from Native Hawaiians, but basis on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks understand that, yes, these funds are specifically set aside to assist Native Hawaiian families eligible to reside on Hawaiian homelands, but there still are the other protected classes that fall under the fair housing laws that still need to be, that DHHL and its program partners would still need to demonstrate compliance for. So I wanted to break down the purpose of NHHSDA into these terms and explain it a little further. So again, NHHSDA provides affordable housing opportunities. So what do we mean by affordable housing? What that means is it's housing that is either developed with NHHSDA funds or housing that is assisted with NHHSDA funds, and thus housing that meets the requirements of NHHSDA. So again, it's homes that are either built using the NHHSDA funds or assisted in one way or another with NHHSDA funds, and that it benefits, and I'm going to get into the other terms here, low-income Native Hawaiian families. And what we mean by low income is the household income does not exceed 80% of the median income for the area. And then for Native Hawaiian families, of course, we know under the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, DHHL determines the eligibility of who is allowed to reside on Hawaiian homelands pursuant to the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. So again, NHHSDA provides affordable housing opportunities to low-income Native Hawaiian families eligible to reside on the Hawaiian homelands. So again, the housing area is primarily focused on Hawaiian homelands for home ownership. And over the years, the appropriation language for this program has allowed for DHHL to use NHHBG funds to provide rental assistance for Native Hawaiian families who are eligible to reside in Hawaiian homelands, but that rental assistance can be provided on and off Hawaiian homelands. So when we talk about the housing area, for homeownership housing, it's on Hawaiian homelands, but for rental assistance, it can be on or off Hawaiian homelands. NHHBG must be used for eligible activities, and those eligible activities must be consistent with those activities that are provided in the Native Hawaiian Housing Plan that DHHL submits to HUD each year. So NHHBG, by statute, identifies 5 different categories of eligible activities. The first category is housing development, which would include activities for housing acquisition, constructing new housing, reconstructing as far as moderate or substantial rehabilitation of affordable housing, and financing related to any of these activities, all fall under housing development. The next eligible activity category is called housing services, and these are activities that are related to providing housing-related services for the benefit of affordable housing residents. So this could include such things as housing counseling, tenant-based rental assistance, and those sorts of things. The next eligible activity category is housing management services. And these are activities that are related to the operation and management of affordable housing that is either developed with NHHBG funds or other funds where the housing units are occupied by NHHBG eligible families. The next eligible activity category is called crime prevention and safety activities. These are activities that are related to providing safety or some type of drug elimination program, property security, resident security, and any type of law enforcement measures and activities that promote safety for the residents of the affordable housing. So it could be things.
Oh, sorry.
Lehua, did you want to ask that the questions be held to the end?
Yeah, if you don't mind, only because we're trying to record. But that being said, we have the chat. If you're able to get on the chat, I can try to field questions too, and we'll definitely field them at the end.
Mahalo. So the crime prevention and safety activities could include things such as security cameras, security gates, neighborhood watch type of programs, and that sort of thing. The final eligible activity category is called model activities. And these are activities that don't quite fit perfectly into the previous 4 categories of eligible activities, but activities that are designed to carry out the purposes of Title 8 of NHHBG, so the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program. And these activities must be specifically approved by HUD before DHHL can implement these activities. So I'll give you a couple of examples where DHHL was approved to use NHHBG funds to do rehabilitation of a community center that is located on Hawaiian homelands, and where that community center was going to be used to hold homebuyer education classes and financial literacy classes. So again, it's a model activity to rehabilitate this structure where the structure is going to be used to provide housing services type of activities. There was also another model activity to assist a community located in a rural area on the Big Island where there was just a one-way in and one-way out access for this homestead community. And so if there was a natural disaster event to take place that would prevent access in or out of that community, DHHO had submitted a proposal to equip this community with certain emergency and first aid supplies so that the community would be able to survive temporarily until such time that access could be opened up and emergency services could access and provide direct assistance. And so that, again, that was just another unique proposal that was designed to address the needs of that specific community. And so as you can imagine, it could be very creative proposals that could fall under this category. So these are the 5 eligible activity categories approved under NHHSDA. DHHL is also allowed to use a portion of their NHHSDA funds to pay for administrative and planning costs. HUD authorizes DHHO to use up to 20% of each grant award for reasonable administrative and planning expenses. And so these are costs that are related to carrying out DHHO's NHHSDA program, and as well as activities that are assisted with the NHHBG funds. So this would include overall program and administrative management costs, like staff salaries and such, costs that are related to coordinating monitoring and evaluation. And we'll get into some of these things that I'm mentioning in a little more detail as we get through the presentation. It would also be costs related to preparing the annual housing plan and annual performance report, and related costs in doing public hearings, holding consultation meetings, doing public notices in the newspaper, and those sorts of things. These costs are also related to any costs that would be incurred where DHHO needs to comply with other federal requirements that are applicable to the NHHBG program. And then as far as administrative and planning costs and that spending cap, it's applicable to DHHO as well as any other subrecipients that DHHO may subaward NHHBG funds to. So if DHHO and these subrecipients or contractors collectively incur administrative and planning costs, then all of those admin and planning costs must be added together for DHHO to demonstrate that they're not exceeding that 20% spending cap. And so I'm trying to explain all of this information, not only for DHHO staff, but for all of the other program participants who are on this training as well, to hopefully share a general and wide understanding. So in case any of these issues come up or folks are questioned, to provide additional information, I just want everyone to understand that there is a reason for it, and it's all to demonstrate compliance with program requirements. I mentioned that DHHO must submit a Native Hawaiian housing plan each year to HUD to identify the program activities that it plans to use its NHHSDA funds for. So as I mentioned earlier, the activities has to be an eligible activity, as I described in the previous slide. The activity must fit in one of those eligible activity categories, and it must be an activity that's included in the housing plan in order for the funds to be used for those activities during that 12-month period covered by the housing plan. So by statute, DHHO is required to demonstrate a long-range plan. A portion of that plan is their long-range goals and objectives and the activities that it anticipates over the next 5 years. And then the 1-year plan portion of the housing plan gets into the nitty-gritty details and budget of all the activities that DHHO intends to carry out in the upcoming 12-month period using their NHHSDA funds. And there's also some additional information that DHHO must describe within the housing plan, as far as what it describes as its useful life affordability period, and any model activities that DHHO intends to implement or they're proposing to implement for the upcoming year could also be submitted through the housing plan. And when HUD reviews the housing plan and determines that the housing plan is in compliance with NHHBG, that is the determination of approval for the information and activities that are included in the housing plan. Once HUD determines that the housing plan is in compliance with NHHBG, then DHHL has the green light to go ahead and start implementing those activities. I do want to mention that the housing plan is considered a fluid document where DHHL could determine within that 12-month period that if it wants to make any changes as far as whether it will actually implement an activity or if it decides it wants to introduce a new activity and amend the housing plan to include a new activity, DHHL does have the ability to do that. It's just that if it's a new activity that's not covered by a eligible activity category that was already determined by HUD to be in compliance with the housing plan that was originally submitted, then DHHL must request HUD's determination that this new activity is in compliance with NHHBG before DHHL can implement the new activity. And so that's where DHHL could amend their housing plan. I just wanted to demonstrate some examples of what kinds of activities that DHHL has included in its current housing plan. And so I divided the activities up into some main categories. In this category of increasing the inventory of affordable house on Hawaiian homelands, DHHL has these 4 different activities that fall under that category. DHHL has an activity related to infrastructure development, to do engineering, design, mass grading, building streets, utilities, and such. And these are to develop lots on trust lands to support housing for residential use. There's also an activity to do developer financing, where DHHL is intending to use NHHBG funds basically to provide an interim construction loan for one or more developers to help reduce the cost of constructing vertical housing units. DHHL also has a financing program which provides an affordable financing option to help homeowners with new home construction or to purchase a home. And there's another activity where DHHL is exploring acquiring additional lands or new units to be added to the Hawaiian homelands inventory. There's also an activity to reduce the number of substandard housing units on Hawaiian homelands. DHHL has a home assistance program, which is designed to finance individual home rehabilitation activities. And so for families whose homes are in such disrepair, where it needs to either be substantially rehabilitated or just starting from scratch, demolished and rebuild, or if it's a home where they want to do energy retrofits or just to make modifications to bring it into compliance with the building code, this program addresses all of those needs. DHHL also has some activities to provide assistance related to rental housing. DHHL currently provides rental assistance for the existing project in Waimanalo, the Waimanalo Kupuna Housing Project. And this is also, of course, on Hawaiian homelands. And this program is designed to keep rents affordable for existing kupuna who reside in that housing project. There's also a few rental voucher programs included in the housing plan. One is a temporary relocation assistance program where it provides temporary rental assistance to families while their primary home is either being rehabilitated or rebuilt under that previous program I described, where DHHL does the home assistance for rehabilitation or demo rebuild. There's also a rental voucher program that provides temporary emergency rent and utilities assistance to help mitigate financial hardship for families associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was basically to help stabilize housing for Native Hawaiian families. It's my understanding that this program has either already winded down or is about to wind down. And so this may not necessarily continue going forward, as particularly related to the COVID pandemic, but could be provided under other circumstances. There's also a rental voucher program that provides temporary rental subsidies for kupuna who are 62 years and older, head of the household, and are currently on the Hawaiian Homeland's waitlist. And this is to help ensure housing stability for kupuna leading up to and hopefully they'll be receiving their lease award from DHHL. There's also a rental voucher program for housing units that are developed for DHHL. So one example of this are homes in the villages of La'iopua, where they are being offered as rent with option to purchase. DHHL has this activity included in their housing plan as an opportunity to provide rental vouchers for families who may need that type of assistance. DHHL is also converting an existing structure to create transitional housing units for homeless Native Hawaiians. And so this is under the housing conversion activity. There is also an activity that provides homeowner, I shall say temporary homeowner assistance for mortgage and utilities assistance to help mitigate financial hardship for families who are in that situation or potentially facing a possibility of having their lease canceled for not making their mortgage payments. DHHL also uses a portion of their NHHBG funds for housing counseling services. And so those are all of the activities that are included in the current housing plan. Now I'm going to segue into all of the different program requirements. So these are federal funds that are awarded solely to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. DHHL implements a lot of these activities directly themselves, but also works in partnership with other entities, which a lot of you are on this training session. And so it's very good for everyone to understand what are all of the requirements that are applicable to use of these NHHBG funds. And so what I am going to do within the next series of slides is to identify what all these program requirements are and to explain them very briefly, just so folks get a general idea of what are all of the requirements that are applicable to using these funds. Ultimately, all of these requirements come under the statute, either under the statute of NHHBG, the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, or the NHHBG regulation, which is found at 24 CFR Part 1006. There are also other federal regulations that are either mentioned through the 24 CFR Part 1006 or fall under HUD general requirements. And so these are what I call other federal regulations that are also applicable to the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program. And so on this slide and the next, I'm going to give you a sort of a laundry list of all of the different types of requirements. And then after that, I'll just go ahead and give you a brief description of what all these requirements are. So we've already talked about the housing plan. That is a requirement that DHHL must submit a housing plan each year in order to use funds for those activities during the 12-month period. We talked about the 5 categories of eligible activities in accordance with NHHBG. We also talked about eligible families, right? Low-income Native Hawaiian families eligible to reside on Hawaiian homelands. And then these are some of the other requirements that are applicable. There's something called affordability restriction and binding commitments. DHHL is also required to have written policies for certain parts of implementing the program. And there are statutory and regulatory requirements that are dictated by the statute and the regulation. But DHHL is also given some flexibility for implementing the activities under the NHHBG program, and that's where the written policies come into play. DHHL is also required to monitor itself as well as any subrecipients or contractors that works with DHHL to implement these NHHBG activities, and that must be done on an annual basis. DHHL is required to submit an annual performance report. The housing plan describes what DHHL plans to do with the funds in the upcoming 12-month period. The annual performance report is DHHL's report to HUD on what was actually done and accomplished during that 12-month period. DHHL is also required to submit an annual federal financial report. DHHL is also required to submit an annual audit report. There are requirements related to insurance coverage for assisted housing units as well as contractor activities. There are some requirements surrounding the generation of program income from the use of NHHBG funds. There are requirements related to labor standards. Most people are familiar with the term of Davis-Bacon wage rates, so this falls under that category. There's also requirements related to environmental review. We talked briefly about non-discrimination requirements in a previous slide. There are also administrative requirements related to conflicts of interest, procurement, cost principles, and audit requirements. There's also requirements related to the addressing of lead-based paint in housing units. There's the Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988 that must be complied with. There are requirements with regard to housing counseling, and also what we call the Section 3 of the HUD Act of 1968, which involves training, economic, and contracting opportunities related to NHHBG-funded projects. There's also a requirement regarding debarment and suspension. And then there's also a requirement related to relocation and real property acquisition. So it is quite a long list of requirements. And so what I'd like to do is just briefly talk about these requirements to give folks a general idea of what's involved. First off, I want to start off by describing the one primary objective of Title VIII of NHHSA, or the NHHBG program, is to assist and promote affordable housing activities to develop, maintain, and operate affordable housing in safe and healthy environments for occupancy by low-income Native Hawaiian families. And so with that, keeping that in mind as one of the primary objectives of this program, you'll see that a lot of these requirements tie back to that to ensure that we are in fact delivering a safe and affordable housing for low-income Native Hawaiian families. And so we talked about how eligible families are that generally is limited to low-income Native Hawaiian families who are eligible to reside on Hawaiian homelands. There are a couple of exceptions to that. It is a quite limited and directed exception, but it is possible for DHHL to provide home ownership assistance to non-low-income Native Hawaiian families as approved by HUD. And this would be specifically to address a need for housing that cannot be reasonably met without NHHBG assistance. And so again, in order to assist families who have incomes greater than 80% of the area median income, it is limited to home ownership related type of assistance activities, and it must be with approval from HUD in order to proceed with providing that type of assistance. I will say that in February, HUD did publish updated changes to the NHHBG regulation. And one update that was made to the regulation gives DHHL some leeway to be able to assist non-low-income families for home ownership assistance to a certain extent without HUD approval. But if DHHL goes beyond those circumstances, then DHHL must in fact get HUD approval in order to proceed. And so I'm just giving you just very general information. This training session is not meant to go into a whole lot of detail. I will be offering additional training sessions that will do a deeper dive into some of these program requirements. And so stay tuned for the announcement of those training sessions. There is also an exception under NHHBG where NHHBG assistance can be made to non-low income and non-Native Hawaiian families if DHHL determines that the presence of the family in the housing involved is essential to the well-being of Native Hawaiian families, and the need for housing of that family, the non-low income, non-Native Hawaiian family, cannot be reasonably met without the assistance. This is one of those things where sometimes it probably doesn't sound like it's something that can actually be done, because we all know that the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act is what governs Hawaiian homelands. And so sometimes what might be stated under NHHBG may not necessarily be consistent with what's stated under the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. And this could be one of those areas. And so I just want to point out that this is what is allowed under NHHBG, but it may be something that conflicts with the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which is the governing statute for Hawaiian homelands. And so sometimes that would prevent some of these provisions from moving forward. So despite all of these provisions provided under NHHBG, I do want to again remind that DHHL must still have written policies in place, and one of those written policies must govern the eligibility, admission, and occupancy of families for NHHBG assisted housing and how those families are selected to receive assistance under NHHBG. And so DHHL's written policy in that regard would come into play when making these types of determinations for assisting, making exceptions to some of the general requirements under the program. So one of the program requirements is the affordability period and binding commitments. The use of NHHBG funds on a property is considered an investment made for low-income families in the community. Because NHHBG funds must benefit low-income Native Hawaiian families, we look at the investment of NHHBG funds into that housing unit as an investment to making that housing unit available for low-income families for a certain period of time. So the return on that investment is the period of time, or that affordability period, or what we call useful life for that property. The useful life affordability period must be established when NHHBG funds are used on a homestead lot, or for a housing unit, or for a housing project, or if the assistance is provided to a family. And DHHL must establish this affordability period within the body of their housing plan. And DHHL does have it defined within their current housing plan. And you will see by taking a look at the housing plan, depending on the amount of NHHBG funds invested into the housing unit, that will determine the affordability period of how long that unit must be made available to low-income families. And so the type of activities that would trigger this requirement would be any type of new home construction, home rehabilitation, financing for acquisition for a home, any type of down payment and closing costs, or even just NHHBG funded financing for those types of activities would, of course, trigger this requirement. This would also be applicable to projects involving project-based rental assistance and model activities. The binding commitment to enforce the affordability is a document that must be a covenant that runs with the land for the housing, and it must that binding commitment must also include remedies in case there's a breach of that commitment for keeping that home affordable. DHHL is responsible for tracking each affordable housing unit, housing project, or model activity and keep records of all of the use restrictions. So DHHO must track each unit that has an affordability period attached to it, and for how long that unit is bound to that affordability restriction. And then, of course, once that affordability period is satisfied, then it comes off of the tracking system. DHHO enforces this affordability restriction through the lease document, and normally it's through the lease addendum. For other types of projects where it's maybe not necessarily an individual housing unit, then DHHO would have to incorporate some type of recorded use restriction lien, for example, to ensure like a project-based rental assistance property will comply with these types of restrictions made to the affordability restriction made to the property. I also wanted to mention that tied to this requirement, DHHO must make a concerted effort to accurately estimate how many NHHBG affordable units will result when it's planning a multi-unit project. So, for example, if 50% of the housing units are expected to be occupied by low-income families, then NHHBG funds should be used to pay up to or at least I should say 50% of the project costs, right? So we're looking at the amount of investment of NHHBG funds going into the project and making sure that that same proration of units will be set aside and used by low-income Native Hawaiian families. Okay. All right. I've already talked about or mentioned that DHHO is required to have certain written policies in place governing certain things. And so I mentioned that one of the written policies must govern eligibility, admission, and occupancy for assisted housing. DHHO must also have written policies with regard to rents and homebuyer payments that are charged for assisted units. What we mean by homebuyer payments is for units that are considered lease to purchase or rent to own. During that rental period, HUD calls them homebuyer payments. And so it's really that rental payment during the rental period leading up to that unit becoming a home ownership unit. DHHO must also have written policies in place to govern the management and maintenance of assisted housing. I've also mentioned earlier that DHHO must do monitoring of itself and its subrecipients and contractors each year. So this is an annual assessment to address any issues that are going on with projects, to assess the progress of housing plan activities that are conducted, also a chance to inspect housing units that are being assisted with NHHBG funds. These would be units that are in the process of construction or rental housing units that are still under DHHL's control or their program participants' control to ensure compliance with NHHBG program requirements. I also described the annual performance report that DHHO must submit each year. So this is a report that DHHO will provide to HUD on the results of the monitoring that it conducted and describing the use of the grant funds for that 12-month period, and also indicate programmatic and activity accomplishments during the 12-month period. This must all be included in the annual performance report. The annual federal financial report is DHHL's report to HUD on the amount of grant funds expended, as well as any program income that was generated and expended during the year. The requirement for insurance coverage says that adequate insurance coverage is required for housing units that are owned, operated, or assisted with more than $5,000 of NHHBG funds. The insured amount must cover replacement costs of the home. The insurance must indemnify against loss from fire, weather, and liability claims. And this is a requirement And if for some reason the sufficient amount of insurance is not secured for the housing unit, and there's some sort of disaster, and the insurance in place is not sufficient to cover replacement costs of the home, then these are, there could be consequences that come back to DHHL if this is not in place or in compliance with the requirements. So this is really important. Program income. This would be income that is generated from the use of NHHBG. So for example, if DHHL, which DHHL does use NHHBG funds to provide financing to families to finance either home construction or to purchase a home. Now, when those loan payments are made back to DHHL, those payments of principal and interest is considered program income. So if DHHL generates more than $25,000 of program income in a fiscal year, then that program income must be used just like regular NHHBG funds. Those funds must be used for NHHBG eligible activities, and those funds are all subject to the same program requirements that the regular NHHBG funds are subject to. Okay. And another thing, DHHL must use their program income before dispersing any new funds from their grant award. So it takes a priority of precedence as far as using program income before drawing down any new funds from the grant award. Labor standards refers to the skilled labor involved in the development of housing. So DHHL must ensure that any contract or agreement for NHHBG assistance, sale or lease of the homes must require prevailing wage rates under the Davis-Bacon Act to be paid to laborers and mechanics who are employed in the development of the affordable housing. So this is a requirement for all units of housing that are being developed with NHHBG funds. And it applies, I think I have it in the next slide. Yes, it applies to any prime contracts greater than $2,000. And so we know how much it costs to develop homes in Hawaii. So basically, any unit of housing that's being developed with NHHBG funds will trigger this labor standards requirement. There are some exceptions to this labor standards requirement, and it involves any contracts that are not in excess of $2,000. Any volunteer labor, sweat equity is not subject to Davis-Bacon wages. And when NHHBG is only used to assist home buyers to acquire single-family housing, Davis-Bacon wage rates will apply to the construction of the housing if there is a written agreement with the housing owner or developer that NHHBG will be used to assist home buyers. So again, I'm sorry, this is kind of getting into the weeds, but these are just identifying some limited exceptions to this requirement. The requirement for environmental review applies to every penny of NHHBG funds used. And so DHHL and its program participants must ensure to perform the environmental review, the appropriate level of environmental review that's applicable to the type of activity that's being carried out. And this is to ensure protection for not only the occupants, but also the environment for where the housing is located. And so this, again, is a very important requirement. And so DHHL does a really good job, I feel, in addressing these requirements. DHHL has increased its capacity over the years. And so I feel that they are doing, they are equipped and prepared to comply with these requirements. HUD also offers separate specific training on environmental review requirements that is made available each year. And so program participants who are looking to learn more information, more in-depth information on the environmental review requirements that are applicable to the NHHBG program are welcome to participate in those separate training sessions. But again, I just wanted to mention this as part of the general overview, that this is a very important requirement, and it's important to comply with the environmental review before any NHHBG funds are committed through contract and expended for any NHHBG activities. All right, the environmental review must be completed, and if it
Claudine, I don't know if you muted yourself by accident.
So sorry about that. Okay, I don't know what happened. But it's very important to ensure that the environmental review requirement is complied with. And if it's a level of environmental review that requires HUD authorization of funds first, to make sure that is done before any NHHBG funds are committed by contract and expended for any NHHBG activities. Continuing on, there are uniform administrative requirements under what we call the 2 CFR Part 200. The 2 Code of Federal Regulations Part 200 has administrative requirements, general administrative requirements that are applicable to any type of HUD grant. And so I'm pointing out some of the specific requirements here that relate to administrative management of grant programs. And so DHHL and all of its subrecipients and contractors must ensure to have adequate financial management controls and internal controls in place. They must abide by the payment standards so that when funds are drawn down from the we call it a LOX account. It's an account in HUD where DHHL can draw down their grant funds to use those funds to pay for invoices for costs that are generated from these NHHBG activities. Those invoices and costs must be paid in a timely manner from when the funds are drawn down from LUX. And so when we talk about payment standards, that's what we're talking about. You know, funds cannot be drawn down and just held on hand for an undetermined period of time. It must be drawn down specifically to pay these costs. And so those costs must be paid in a timely manner. There are certain requirements with regard to ensure that there is no conflict of interest with regard to procurement and awarding contracts with the use of grant funds. There are procurement standards and certain contract provisions that must be included when contracts are made using NHHBG funds. And there are also cost principles determining that the costs must be necessary, reasonable, and allowable in order for NHHBG funds to be used for those types of costs. So these are all the different types of requirements under this category. DHHL is required to submit an annual report. So any, and this would actually extend to DHHL's subrecipients as well. So any non-federal entity that expends $750,000 or more in a year in federal awards, right, including recipients and subrecipients, they must have a single audit or program-specific audit conducted for that year and submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. The regulation regarding lead-based paint, all of these subparts under the regulation are applicable to the NHHBG program. So if there is a housing unit that's being acquired that was built prior to 1978, there are certain disclosure requirements that must be complied with. If the housing has project-based rental assistance in it, built prior to 1978, there's certain requirements related to that. So basically any housing built prior to 1978, and if it's going to be assisted with NHHBG funds under any of these categories, and there are certain requirements that must be complied with. The Drug-Free Workplace Act, grant recipients must notify HUD of an employee's conviction of a criminal drug offense, is basically what that involves. There are certain requirements with regard to relocation and real property acquisition. So if a property is being acquired as a result of an NHHBG assisted activity, DHHL must minimize any displacement of persons to the greatest extent feasible. And if it does involve permanent displacement of persons, then NHHBG funds must be used to provide relocation assistance for displaced persons. Effective August 1 of 2021, any type of housing counseling that, housing counseling as defined under HUD's definition of housing counseling that is funded with or provided in connection with HUD programs, including the NHHBG program. The housing counseling must be provided by certified housing counselors who work for organizations that are approved to participate in HUD's housing counseling program. And so this is a very recent update in this requirement to the program, and it is applicable to when using NHHBG funds in this way, or if housing counseling is required in connection with an NHHBG activity, then this requirement must be complied with. As far as debarment and suspension, the federal government ensures the integrity of federal programs by conducting business only with responsible persons. And so in order for DHHL to demonstrate compliance with this as a recipient of a federal grant award, DHHL and its subrecipients and contractors may not enter into contracts or agreements with persons who are considered excluded or disqualified from participating in federal programs. And so we have a website that DHHL can check parties to see if they are an excluded party from participating in HUD programs or federal government-wide programs, as well as a HUD list of limited denial participation. That would be where DHHL would check for these entities. Under the Section 3 of the HUD Act of 1968, the purpose of this requirement is to bring economic opportunities that are generated by certain HUD financial assistance expenditures to the greatest extent feasible, to make these opportunities available to low and very low income persons who reside in the community where the financial assistance is expended. So this would be applicable to public housing programs and other programs that provide housing and community development assistance. And that is the category where the NHHBG program is included. So a Section 3 project means any type of housing rehabilitation, housing construction, and other public construction projects that costs more than $200,000, regardless of whether the project is fully or partially assisted with HUD financial assistance. This would be considered a covered project. To the greatest extent feasible and consistent with existing federal, state, and local laws, recipients such as DHHL shall ensure that any type of employment and training opportunities in connection with that Section 3 project is provided to Section 3 workers. And any type of contracts for work that is awarded in connection with a Section 3 project are to be provided to business concerns that provide economic opportunities to Section 3 workers. So there are certain provisions that can be included in invitations for bids or contracts, once contracts are awarded, that DHHL could utilize to demonstrate their attempt to comply with this requirement. That concludes my general overview of the NHHBG program and all of the program requirements that are applicable to that program. In the next couple of slides, I'm also going to describe a general overview of the other Native Hawaiian program under HUD, which is the Section 184A Native Hawaiian Housing Loan Guarantee Program. The Section 184A program provides access to sources of private financing for homes located on Hawaiian homelands. So basically, this is a mortgage financing option that's available to Native Hawaiian families looking to finance their home on Hawaiian homelands. Because the Hawaiian homelands are inalienable, lenders cannot foreclose on properties that are located on Hawaiian homelands like they do for properties that are on fee simple land. And so because of that special legal status of Hawaiian homelands, this is a loan guarantee program where HUD offers a loan guarantee to lenders in exchange for the lender giving a mortgage loan to the borrower for their home on Hawaiian homelands. HUD allows a 100% guarantee of the unpaid principal and interest due on an eligible loan. So the lender makes the loan to the borrower, and HUD provides the guarantee to the lender to encourage them to participate in the program, which gives the borrower a financing option. So aside from Section 184A, there's also other similar programs that provide mortgage financing options such as FHA, Veterans Affairs, and U.S. Development of Agriculture. Some of the highlights of the Section 184A Loan Guarantee Program is this loan program can be used to finance home purchases, home rehabilitation, new home construction, and then it can also do refinancing. It is a up to 30-year term loan. It is strictly a fixed rate loan. HUD does not dictate the interest rates. The interest rate is determined, negotiable between the borrower and the lender, and it's usually based on market interest rates. There is a minimum down payment requirement of 2.25%. HUD offers a 41% debt to income ratio criteria. There is a 1% guarantee fee that's required for this loan program. The borrower must pay the 1% guarantee fee. They can either pay it upfront in cash at closing, or they can finance the guarantee fee into the loan. And then finally, the 184A guaranteed loan is an assumable loan. So again, this is just one mortgage financing option available to beneficiaries on Hawaiian homelands. That really concludes my presentation. The following slide just offers some photos to demonstrate examples of some of the projects that have been funded with NHHBG funds over the years. And so this is a photo of infrastructure work underway in the Kaupea homestead community. So obviously that's an existing homestead community. So this is a photo from years ago when the infrastructure was in development. This is also another example of infrastructure construction done in Waiakea in Hilo on the Big Island. And these are the homes in Kaupea when they were under construction and then completed. So again, in Kaupea, in Kapolei on Oahu. These are homes that were partially financed with NHHBG funds, as well as the American Rescue and Recovery Act funds, where these are homes that are in Waianae in Kaupuni Village. These homes were built with various energy efficient features that earned it a LEED Platinum certified status of energy efficiency. And so this is a photo of the exterior of the home and some photos of the interior portion of the home. This is one example of home rehabilitation before and after shot of a home in Ho'olehua on Molokai. And another home before and after home rehabilitation assisted with NHHBG funds in Kalama'ula on Molokai. This is meant to describe or demonstrate an example of a model activity. I mentioned earlier in my example, there was a community center, and in particular, this one in Papakolea, there was a rehabilitation project to do some security enhancement features for the community center, where they installed security gates and doors and lighting to enhance security of the community center. I believe there are also gates that were enhanced that surround the covered basketball court at that community center. And so this is an example of one of the model activities that was partially funded with NHHBG funds. Here are two families that benefited from NHHSDA assistance, where NHHSDA was used in partnership with Habitat for Humanity to do home construction for a home for this lessee in Kewalo and for this family in Waimanalo. And here is another family. This was almost a year ago when this photo was taken. At that time, the new home construction was underway in Kauai High on the Big Island, also in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. Here is another home where NHHSDA funds were used to provide homeowner financing for this new home build in Kula on Maui. And these are just examples of homes that were purchased using Section 184A financing. And so some homes in Wai'ehuko on Maui, and also homes in Ka'ulu-o-Kahai in Kapolei were financed with 184A. And these are the interior of some of the homes. I believe this is also in Ka'ulu-o-Kahai, homes financed with 184A loans. And that concludes my presentation. So mahalo for your time, and I hope this information was informative.